On the morning of October 14th, 2024, a certified letter arrived at a small stone house tucked into a fold of the American Sonoran desert edge. The courier's van kicked up a plume of fine reddish dust that hung in the still air long after it had gone. Inside the house, Wren unfolded the letter. It contained a single sheet of paper and a certified check from the Maricopa County Municipal Water Authority. The check was made out to her in the amount of $1,250,000. For a moment, she just stared at the numbers, a string of zeros that seemed alien and inert on the crisp paper. The letter accompanying it was brief, written in the dry, formal language of legal settlement. It was the final payment, it said, for the permanent acquisition of primary access rights and the establishment of a conservation easement. To understand that check and the silence that fell over the county when its amount became known, you have to understand the water. And to understand the water, you have to go back 11 years to a sterile wood-paneled hearing room in the county administration building. Let me tell you about the girl who walked into that room, because it's where the story really begins. 11 years earlier, the air in room 3B of the Maricopa County Courthouse was thick with the scent of stale coffee and expensive cologne. It was a room designed for quiet attrition, a place where inconvenient claims came to be worn down by procedure and delay. 6 lawyers, 5 men and 1 woman, sat on one side of a long, polished table. They represented the Municipal Water Authority, a powerful entity tasked with slaking the unquenchable thirst of a desert metropolis sprawling ever outward. Their suits were dark, their briefcases were leather, and their arguments were built on a fortress of actuarial tables, engineering reports, and statutory law. They had been fighting for years to extinguish a handful of vestigial, pre-incorporation water claims held by the old ranching families on the county's arid fringe. It was a cleanup operation, a matter of legal hygiene. These old claims were a nuisance on their immaculate grid of water rights, tiny illogical asterisks on a map that was otherwise a model of modern resource management. Most of the families had already given in, worn down by legal fees and the sheer grinding persistence of the authority. They took the modest buyouts, signed the papers, and plugged their homes into the municipal main, accepting the monthly bill as the price of progress. Only one claim remained. It was attached to a small 20-acre parcel of arid mesa and seasonal washes, a property considered nearly worthless by every metric the authority used. The claim itself was for a spring, a feature so insignificant it didn't even appear on their geological surveys. For 11 years, they had sent letters, made calls, and filed motions to terminate the right as abandoned. On this particular morning, they expected to finally close the file. The property owner of record, Roy, had indicated through his lawyer, a man he could no longer afford, that he would not contest the final hearing. The authorities' lawyers arranged their papers, murmuring quietly among themselves. It was a formality. Then the door opened. A girl walked in. She was 14 years old, small for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a simple, severe braid. She wore jeans, worn boots, and a plain cotton shirt. She was alone. In her hand, she carried a long, tightly rolled tube of yellowed paper, secured with a faded ribbon. This was Wren. She walked to the empty side of the long table, the side reserved for the opposition, and placed the paper tube carefully in front of her. She pulled out the chair and sat. The room, which had been filled with a low hum of professional confidence, fell utterly silent. The 6 lawyers stared. The hearing officer, a man named Henderson, who had seen nearly everything in his 30 years on the bench, peered over his spectacles. "May I help you, young lady?" Henderson asked, his voice gentle but laced with confusion. Wren looked directly at him, her expression unreadable. "I am here for the matter of Claim 73B, the Augustine Spring." One of the younger lawyers for the authority, a man named Drew with a sharp suit and an even sharper smile, almost laughed. He caught himself turning it into a cough. The lead counsel, a senior partner with graying temples, leaned forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice smooth and placating, "this is a formal legal proceeding. The claimant of record is Roy. Is this his daughter?" "She is my daughter," a voice said from the doorway. Roy stood there, his face etched with worry. He was a good man, a man broken by the modern world. He'd tried to make a go of the small ranch his father had left him, but the economics no longer worked. He drove a gravel truck for a living now, and the dust of the quarry seemed to have settled permanently into the lines on his face. He looked at Wren, his expression a mixture of terror and a deep buried pride he could not quite extinguish. "Roy," Henderson said, his tone softening, "we were under the impression you were not contesting." "I'm not," Roy said, his voice strained. "He wouldn't look at the lawyers, I can't." "But she insisted." He looked at his daughter, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes. "Just come home. Let it go." Wren did not look at her father. She kept her eyes on Henderson. "My great-grandfather Augustine filed the original claim," she said, her voice clear and steady, betraying no hint of nervousness. "My grandfather inherited it. My father holds it now. The claim is older than the state. It is older than your authority. It is based on first use, and it has never been abandoned." Drew, the young lawyer, could no longer contain his condescension. "Miss Henderson, the authority's position is clear. There is no record of continuous use. Our surveys show no significant aquifer. What they call a spring is a seasonal seep, a negligible hydrological feature. It's a puddle. We have satellite data, ground-penetrating radar surveys, and sworn expert testimony. What do they have?" He gestured dismissively at the girl. For the first time, Wren looked at him. Her gaze was flat, clinical, as if observing a strange insect. Then, she turned her attention back to the table. With slow, deliberate movements, she untied the ribbon and unrolled the paper. It was a map. It was drawn by hand, in faded black ink on what looked like architectural vellum, now brittle and yellow with age. The draftsmanship was exquisite, precise, and beautiful. It depicted the 20-acre parcel of land, but in a way none of the authorities' expensive surveys ever had. It showed every contour, every cluster of creosote and mesquite, every rock outcropping, and woven through it all was a network of fine, hair-like blue lines, converging on a single point marked with a star. The title block in elegant, sloping cursive read, "The System of the Augustine Spring, surveyed and drawn by Augustine 1951. This is my great-grandfather's map," Wren said. She stood up, her small frame barely clearing the top of the table. She placed a finger on one of the faint blue lines. "You look for water underground," she said, her voice filling the quiet room. You drill wells. You measure aquifers. You think water comes from below. My great-grandfather knew the water here comes from the air. The lawyers exchanged bemused glances. Water from the air. The girl was talking poetry. He called them collectors, Wren continued, her finger tracing the delicate lines. These aren't streams. They are channels, lined with a particular kind of flat stone, angled just so. They run for miles, just beneath the surface. They harvest the monsoon rains, yes, but that is not their secret. Their secret is the dew. She looked up from the map and stared at the panel of lawyers. In the Sonoran Desert, the temperature can drop 40 degrees between day and night. The air at night is often heavy with moisture. These stone channels, they cool faster than the surrounding earth. They are condensers. They gather the dew, ounce by ounce, night after night. They are veins, and they all lead here. Her finger moved to the star on the map. To the cistern. A cistern, the lead counsel asked, his professional curiosity momentarily overriding his legal strategy. Your claim is for a spring. The spring is what feeds the first cistern, Wren said patiently. It's slow, a gallon an hour, maybe less. It never stops. But the collectors, they are what fill the main cisterns. There are 3 of them, dug into the north-facing side of the mesa, where the rock keeps them cool. They are sealed with a plaster my great-grandfather made from lime and prickly pear cactus juice. They lose almost nothing to evaporation. She pointed to a section of the map covered in tiny, meticulous notes. He recorded the levels every week for 30 years. He knew the rhythm of the place. He knew how much the system gathered in a dry year and how much it gathered in a wet one. He wrote that the system had never gone dry. Not in the drought of 53. Not in the drought of 76. Drew spoke up, his voice dripping with skepticism. This is a lovely story, a piece of family folklore, but it's not evidence. We are talking about adjudicated water rights in the 21st century. Where is this cistern now? Our surveyors found nothing. No infrastructure, no wellhead, just dirt and rock. Wren's gaze was unwavering. You didn't find it because you weren't meant to. My great-grandfather was a quiet man. He had seen what happens when men find water in the desert. He built the system to be invisible. The caps for the cisterns are flat stones that sit flush with the ground. You could walk right over them and never know they were there, unless you know what to look for. She paused, letting the silence stretch. He knew a time would come when the world would go thirsty. He did not build it for profit. He built it for resilience. Henderson, the hearing officer, leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the hand-drawn map. He was a man of the desert, born and raised. He remembered the stories his own grandfather told, of old-timers who could find water where no scientist could. He looked at the authorities' lawyers, at their slick presentations and their data-driven certainties. Then he looked at the girl, at her fierce, quiet dignity and the legacy she held rolled up in her hands. The authority claims the right has been abandoned due to non-use, Henderson said, thinking aloud. Young lady, can you prove the system is still functional? Yes, Wren said without hesitation. The water is there. It is clean. And it is cool. There was another long silence. The lead counsel for the authority shuffled his papers, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Their entire case was built on the premise that the water did not exist in any meaningful quantity. They had pages of data to prove it. But data is an abstraction. The girl was offering a physical fact. Henderson made a decision. It was unorthodox, but the situation was unorthodox. "This hearing is suspended," he announced. "We will reconvene in 1 week. On site. The authority will send its hydrologist. I will attend myself. We will see this cistern." He looked directly at Wren. "You had better be right." "I am," Wren said. She carefully rolled up the old map, tied the ribbon around it, and picked it up. She gave a slight nod to Henderson, turned, and walked out of the room, leaving 6 speechless lawyers and her astonished father in her wake. The door clicked shut, and the world of paper and procedure felt suddenly flimsy, unreal. Something had shifted in that room. A different kind of evidence had been presented. Not data, but a testament. Not a statistic, but a story. Let me tell you about the system Augustine built, because it's where the story's real power lies. He was not an engineer. He was a stonemason who had come from the Basque country, a land of stone and steep hillsides. He arrived in the Arizona territory with nothing but his tools and a knowledge of how the world worked that was far older than any university degree. He understood gravity, temperature, and time. He saw the desert not as a void to be conquered, but as a complex system to be understood and partnered with. The modern world saw the 20-acre parcel as useless because it lacked a single exploitable resource. The soil was too thin for farming, the grades too steep for building. It was a piece of land to be crossed over, not settled on. Augustine saw it as a canvas. He spent his first year just watching. He watched where the scant rain flowed. He watched where the morning mist clung the longest. He used a thermometer to measure the temperature of the soil at different depths and on different facings of the rock. He tasted the dirt. He sat for hours, motionless, watching the way the shade from a single ironwood tree moved across the ground. He was mapping the land, not in 2 dimensions, but in 4. He was learning its habits, its secrets, its subtle energies. The world of modern efficiency dismisses this kind of observation as pointless. It cannot be quantified on a spreadsheet, cannot be converted into a metric of productivity. It is seen as idle, romantic, inefficient. For Augustine, it was the most critical work of all. It was the process of listening. When he finally began to build, he worked with the quiet, unhurried pace of a man laying a cathedral floor. The spring itself was a tiny, patient thing, a mere weeping of water from a fissure in the granite at the base of the mesa. A modern hydrologist would have measured its flow rate and dismissed it. Augustine saw it as the system's heartbeat. He didn't try to increase its flow, he honored it. He lined the opening with carefully chosen stones, creating a small, protected basin. This was the first offering. From there, he began the great work, the collectors. He spent months walking the surrounding land, gathering the right stones. They had to be a specific type of schist, flat, dense, and dark. He learned to split them with a single, expert blow of his hammer, creating a clean, flat surface. He then began to dig the channels, never more than a foot deep. He laid the stones inside them, overlapping them like scales, creating a smooth, continuous surface. Each stone was angled imperceptibly, guiding any moisture that condensed upon it toward the central spine of the system. It was back-breaking, tedious labor. Miles of it. His neighbors, the few other ranchers trying to scratch a living from the unforgiving land, thought he was mad. They were drilling wells, deeper and deeper, chasing the falling water table. They were buying bigger pumps, powered by gasoline engines that coughed and sputtered in the desert heat. They saw Augustine on his knees, day after day, laying his little stone gutters that led nowhere. They called his land the Rock Farm. He ignored them. He was not building for next year's cattle. He was building for his grandchildren's grandchildren. He was planting a tree whose shade he would never enjoy. The cisterns were his masterwork. He chose a spot on the shaded north face of the mesa, and, using only hand tools, began to dig into the solid rock. He dug 3 chambers, each the size of a small room, connecting them with stone-lined tunnels. The labor took him 2 years. Then he plastered them. He harvested the pads of the prickly pear cactus, burned them to remove the spines, and mashed them into a thick, viscous slime. He mixed this with lime he'd kilned himself and fine sand from a particular wash. The resulting plaster was miraculous. It was waterproof, slightly flexible, and it breathed. It kept the water sweet and cool, insulated by tons of solid rock from the scorching sun above. When he was finished, the system was nearly invisible. The collector channels were covered with a thin layer of soil. The stone caps of the cisterns were indistinguishable from the thousands of other rocks littering the landscape. The only visible part of the entire vast network was the small, humble opening of the spring. The system was a secret, shared only with the land itself. This was the legacy he left to his son, who passed it to his son, Roy. But the world had changed. Roy's generation was taught to trust the expert, to believe in the grid. The quiet, invisible system of his grandfather seemed like a relic, a piece of folklore. The monthly water bill was a concrete fact. The dew-collecting channels were a myth. The pressure to sell the water right, to get rid of the liability and the tax bill on a useless piece of land, was immense. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. But Wren had listened to a different story. From the time she was a small child, she had walked that land with her father, who still held a grudging respect for his grandfather's work. He'd shown her the map. He'd shown her one of the cistern caps, lifting it with a grunt to reveal the dark, still water below. He'd told her Augustine's words, "This is not our water. We are only its keepers. It is for the lean times." While other children were playing video games, Wren was studying the map. She was memorizing the lines, cross-referencing them with the land itself. She found the faint depressions of the collector channels. She learned to read the subtle changes in vegetation that hinted at the moisture just beneath the surface. The system was not a myth to her. It was a living thing. And when the final notice from the Water Authority arrived, she knew she could not let it die. The week after the hearing was tense. Roy was beside himself with anxiety. "What were you thinking?" he asked her, his voice ragged. "They're lawyers, Wren. They have experts, scientists. You have a crazy old map and a puddle in the rocks." "It's not a puddle," Wren said calmly, cleaning the soot from a kerosene lamp. "And it's not a crazy old map. It's a blueprint." Her cousin Theo, who was 16 and full of the easy certainties of youth, was merciless. "So, you're going to show them your magic water collection system. They're going to laugh you out of the county. Why can't you just be normal? Everyone else is on the main line. It's easier." "Easier is not always better," Wren replied, not looking up. She spent the week in preparation. It was not a preparation of arguments, but of restoration. She walked the 20 acres with a canvas bag and a small trowel. She checked the inlets to the main cisterns, clearing away the debris that a decade of neglect had allowed to accumulate. She found a section of a collector channel that had been damaged by an erosion gully and, using stones she found nearby, repaired it with the same patient skill her great-grandfather had used. She was not just a girl defending a claim. She was a keeper, resuming her duties. On the appointed day, a convoy of white government vehicles made its way up the dusty track to the property. Henderson arrived in his own dusty pickup. Drew and the lead counsel from the authority were there, along with a man introduced as their chief hydrologist, a man named Peters, who wore a perpetual smirk of professional skepticism. "All right, young lady," Henderson said, his tone kind but firm. "Show us." Wren led them away from the house, not toward the visible spring, but up the gentle slope of the mesa. She walked with a quiet confidence, her boots making soft sounds on the hard-baked earth. She led them to a seemingly random spot, a flat patch of ground distinguished by nothing more than a few scraggly bushes. "Here," she said. The hydrologist, Peters, snorted. He pulled out a sophisticated-looking device, a tablet connected to a sensor. "There's nothing here," he said, waving the device over the ground. "Bedrock is 8 feet down. Soil moisture is less than 3%. It's bone dry." Drew crossed his arms, a triumphant look on his face. This was the expensive, data-driven reality he trusted. Wren ignored them. She knelt and pointed to a small, triangular white stone embedded in the ground, no bigger than her hand. "This is the marker," she said. From there, she took 3 paces to the north and 5 paces to the east. She stopped and scraped at the hard dirt with the heel of her boot, revealing the edge of a large, flat slab of rock. "This is the cap to the first cistern," she said. She gestured to a small rusted iron ring set into the stone, almost invisible. She had cleaned the dirt from it the day before. Roy, who had followed them at a distance, now came forward. He and Wren each took a side of the ring. They pulled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, grating sound of stone on stone, the cap began to move. It slid sideways, revealing a dark, perfectly square opening in the earth. A breath of cool, damp air rose from the hole, a stark contrast to the shimmering heat of the day. Everyone fell silent. Henderson, the lawyers, even Peters, the hydrologist, leaned forward to look. Down below, reflecting the perfect square of blue sky above, was a surface of black, still water. It was so clear, so placid, it looked like a sheet of polished obsidian. Peters knelt, his skepticism momentarily forgotten. He unslung a canvas satchel and took out a sampling bottle on a long cord. He lowered it carefully into the darkness until it made a soft, plopping sound. When he brought it back up, it was full of crystal clear water. He took out a portable testing kit. He measured the pH. He tested for dissolved solids. He tested for contaminants. As he worked, His smirk slowly faded, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated astonishment. "Well?" Drew asked, his voice sharp with impatience. Peters looked up, his face pale. "It's clean," he stammered. "It's cleaner than municipal water. Total dissolved solids are less than 50 parts per million. It's perfect water." He looked back into the dark hole as if seeing a ghost. "And it's cold. The temperature is 55 degrees. Wren pointed. "This is the smallest of the three. It is fed by the spring alone. The other two are over there." She gestured toward the base of the mesa. "They are the ones fed by the collectors. They are full." No one spoke. The reality of the cool, dark water in the ground completely invalidated the reams of data the authority had brought with them. Their satellite maps and ground-penetrating radar had been looking for the wrong thing. They had been searching for a geological feature, a product of nature. They had failed to conceive of a piece of infrastructure, a work of human hands so perfectly integrated with the landscape that it had become invisible. It was an artifact of a different kind of science, a different way of thinking. Henderson looked from the cistern to Wren. He looked at the hand-drawn map she was holding once more. He looked at the stunned faces of the authorities' legal team. "The claim stands," he said, his voice quiet, but final. "The right is confirmed. This is not a negligible feature. It is a significant functioning water system, and there is no evidence of abandonment. On the contrary," he glanced at the freshly cleared channels, "there is evidence of stewardship." He turned to the lawyers. "I suggest the authority stop trying to extinguish this right and start trying to learn from it." He gave a respectful nod to Wren, then turned and walked back to his truck. The hearing was over. For the next 11 years, the world moved on. The authority, humiliated but bound by the ruling, left the Augustan claim alone. They classified it as a private, non-transferable ancestral right, an anomaly they could wall off in their records and ignore. Roy, relieved beyond measure, went back to driving his gravel truck. Theo went off to college to study business. The 20-acre parcel and its invisible water system were forgotten once more by the outside world. But they were not forgotten by Wren. The ruling had not been a victory for her, but a commencement. It had granted her the right to become the keeper her great-grandfather had intended. Those 11 years were a period of slow, patient, invisible work. She did not go away to a university. Her university was the 20 acres of rock and scrub. Her professors were the sun, the stones, and the water. She finished high school through correspondence courses, studying late into the night. But her days were spent on the land. She walked the entire network of collector channels, all several miles of them, clearing them of silt and reinforcing their stone linings. She learned the feel of the land, knowing by instinct where a flash flood might cause a washout, where a burrowing animal might disrupt a channel. She descended into the cisterns themselves. Using a rope and harness, she rappelled into the cool darkness, inspecting every inch of Augustine's cactus plaster. She found a few small cracks, and she learned to repair them, experimenting for months to replicate the original mixture. She found his handwritten ledgers in a tin box in the old workshop, and she continued his work, recording the water levels every week, adding her own neat columns next to his faded script. She learned the system's annual rhythm, the slow drop during the dry foresummer, the swift replenishment during the monsoon, the steady, patient gathering during the clear, cold nights of winter. Her work was solitary. Her father watched with a kind of pained love. He was proud of her dedication, but he worried for her future. "This is all well and good, Ren," he'd say, "but what are you going to do? You can't make a living from a cistern." Theo, visiting on holidays from college, was less diplomatic. He saw her dirt-stained hands and her obsessive focus on the land as a tragic waste. "You're brilliant, Ren," he told her one Thanksgiving. "You could be anything. An engineer, a scientist. Instead, you're out here playing in the dirt, tending to some primitive plumbing. The world has moved on. The world is moving in the wrong direction," she replied, poring over Augustine's map. In the 8th year of her stewardship, a man appeared. It was Drew, the young lawyer from the hearing, now older, his suit just as sharp, but his smile a little more strained. He was a senior vice president at the authority now. He came not with a legal summons, but with a business proposal. He found Ren not at the house, but on her knees half a mile away, carefully resetting a section of stone channel. She looked up as he approached, her face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. "Ren," he said, trying for a friendly, familiar tone. "Good to see you." She just nodded, waiting. "Look," he began, getting straight to the point. "We're expanding the Western Pipeline. The city just keeps growing. We need to run a new trunk line, and the most efficient route cuts right across a corner of your property." He unrolled a sleek, computer-generated map. "We're prepared to offer you a very generous price for a 15-foot easement. $100,000. Cash." Ren looked at his map. The proposed route cut directly through 3 of her most productive collector channels. "No," she said. Drew's smile tightened. "Okay, I understand. You have a sentimental attachment. Let's talk about the system itself. It's a marvel, a real piece of history. But it's also a liability. It's uninsurable. It's not up to any modern code. We'd like to make you another offer. We will pay you $200,000 for the water right. We'll decommission the old system, safely of course, and we'll hook you up to the municipal main for free, for life. No more water bills, no more worrying about this thing." He gestured at the land around them. "You'll be secure." Ren stood up, wiping her dusty hands on her jeans. She looked at him, and for a moment, he saw the same 14-year-old girl from the hearing room. "You're offering me a price," she said. "You don't understand the value." "The value is $200,000, Drew said, his patience thinning. "It's a number on a piece of paper. It's how the world works. My great-grandfather didn't build this to sell it," she said. "He built it to last. Your system is built for profit. It's efficient. It moves millions of gallons of water over hundreds of miles. But it's brittle. Every part of it depends on every other part. The pumps depend on the power grid. The treatment plants depend on a supply chain of chemicals. The whole thing depends on a single river, 1,000 miles away. It's the most advanced water system in the world," Drew retorted. Stung. "It's a house of cards," Ren said, her voice quiet but absolute. "One day the wind will blow, and it will fall down." She knelt again and picked up a stone, fitting it perfectly into the channel. "This will still be here." Drew stared at her, utterly nonplussed. He was a man who dealt in numbers, in contracts, in leverage. He did not know how to argue with a principle. He saw a stubborn, backward-looking woman living in the past. He could not see the keeper of a deep and resilient future. "The offer stands," he said stiffly, rolling up his map. "When you're ready to be practical, give me a call." He walked away, shaking his head at her foolishness. 3 years later, the wind blew. It didn't begin with a bang. It began with a memo, and then a press conference. A new, aggressive, and highly persistent strain of cyanobacteria had been detected in the distant reservoir that was the primary source for the entire region's water supply. It was a species that produced a potent neurotoxin. Worse, it was resistant to the standard chlorination and filtration methods used by the authorities' treatment plants. At first, the authority was reassuring. They spoke of advanced oxidation processes, of new filtration media they were flying in. They issued a boil water advisory, confident they could get a handle on the problem. But they couldn't. The bloom was explosive, fed by a combination of unusually high temperatures and agricultural runoff from upriver. The toxins overwhelmed their systems. Within a week, the boil water advisory became a do-not-drink order. Within 2 weeks, it became a do-not-use order. The toxins could be absorbed through the skin. The taps that had delivered limitless, clean water to millions of people now delivered poison. Panic was a slow-rolling wave that quickly became a tsunami. The stores were stripped of bottled water in hours. Tanker trucks were brought in by the National Guard, but the logistics were a nightmare. The sprawling city and its suburbs were a landscape of desperate, thirsty people. The system that had been a marvel of modern engineering had become a vector for disaster. Its greatest strength, its centralized, interconnected nature, was now its most critical weakness. Every faucet was connected to the same source, and the source was toxic. Drew was at the heart of the crisis, working 100-hour weeks in the authorities' emergency command center. He saw the data streams, the frantic models, the cascading failures. He saw a multi-billion-dollar system brought to its knees by a microscopic organism. He saw the brittle house of cards come tumbling down, and in the middle of the 3rd week of the crisis, in a moment of sleepless, desperate clarity, he remembered. He remembered a girl. He remembered a dark hole in the ground, full of cool, clean water. He remembered her words, "This will still be here." He left the command center without telling anyone where he was going. He drove his own car, navigating streets snarled with traffic and lined with people holding empty jugs. He drove out of the city, into the desert, to the 20-acre parcel he had once dismissed as a liability. He found Wren where he had found her 3 years before, tending to her channels. She looked up as his car approached. Her expression calm, unsurprised. He got out of the car, his expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard. He was no longer the confident emissary of a powerful system. He was a supplicant. "The water," he said, his voice cracking. "Is it still clean?" Wren nodded. "Yes, we need it," he said, the words a surrender. "We need all of it. We'll pay you. Anything you want." Wren looked at him, her gaze holding no triumph, only a deep, quiet sorrow for the failure he represented. "It is not for sale," she said. Drew's face fell. He thought she was refusing. "But it is for use," she continued. "This is what it was built for." The lean times. That was the beginning of the negotiation. It was unlike any negotiation Drew had ever been a part of. Wren was not interested in price. She was interested in terms. She did not want to sell the water right. She wanted to grant the authority a temporary license to use the water, under her strict supervision. She would not allow their pumps, their chemicals. The water would be drawn from the cisterns using a solar-powered pump she had installed years ago, a slow, gentle pump that would not disrupt the system's balance. It would be distributed not through their contaminated pipes, but trucked to local community centers. She demanded one more thing. A portion of the payment would not be in cash, but in kind. The authority would fund a permanent, endowed apprenticeship program. It would teach a new generation of keepers the principles of the Augustin system. It would be a school for resilience. The authority, desperate, agreed to everything. The contract they drew up was a legal masterpiece of concession, and the payment, calculated based on the emergency value of the millions of gallons of pure water held in her cisterns, was staggering. It led to the certified check that arrived on that October morning. The aftermath was quiet, but profound. For 3 months, while the authority struggled to build a new, advanced filtration plant, the Augustin Spring was the only reliable source of pure water for 250,000 people. A line of tanker trucks formed a slow, respectful procession to the edge of the 20-acre parcel each day, filling up from a simple stainless steel spigot that Wren had installed. The land was no longer seen as a worthless rock farm. It became a place of pilgrimage. People would come and just stand at the fence line, looking at the unremarkable piece of desert that was saving them. They could not see the system, but they could feel its presence. Theo, her cousin, came home. His business degree seemed useless in a world where the most basic necessity had failed. He watched the trucks fill up. He saw Wren directing the operation with quiet, calm authority. He came to her, his youthful arrogance gone, replaced by a humble curiosity. "Can you teach me?" he asked. "I want to learn." He became her first apprentice. He started by learning to clean the channels, his hands getting stained with the same dirt he had once mocked. He learned the names of the plants, the feel of the stones, the rhythm of the water. He was learning a language he never knew existed. The story of the girl who faced down the lawyers, of the invisible system that saved the city, became a local legend. But Wren remained unchanged. The money was put into a trust to protect the land and fund the apprenticeship program in perpetuity. She continued to live in the small stone house, to walk the land, to record the water levels in her ledger. The world had come to her, but she had not gone to the world. In the end, this was a story about 2 different kinds of wealth. The first is the wealth of the modern system, the wealth of the spreadsheet. It is a wealth measured in dollars, in efficiencies, in quarterly returns. It is abstract, scalable, and powerful. It seeks to conquer nature, to channel it into predictable, profitable streams. But it is a brittle wealth, because it prizes uniformity over diversity, and speed over patience. It carries within it the seeds of its own spectacular failure. It builds a house of cards on a foundation of simplified assumptions, and it is always, eventually, surprised by the wind. The second is an older, quieter kind of wealth. It is the wealth of the canvas bag, the hand-drawn map, the well-tended stone. It is a wealth measured in resilience, in knowledge, in continuity. It is not abstract, It is rooted in a specific place, in the deep observation of its unique character. It does not seek to conquer nature, but to partner with it. It is slow, patient, and inefficient by any modern metric. But it is durable. It understands that true security lies not in the control of a system, but in the stewardship of a living thing. One worldview offers a price. The other understands the value. And while the world will always be seduced by the promise of the first, it is the quiet, stubborn wisdom of the second that, in the end, will be there to quench its thirst.